We have scraped the bedrock of the archives to bring you the final frontier of vertical flight. We are not just listing machines, we are covering the iconic gunships that defined wars, the secret stealth helicopters of the Navy SEALs, the flying jeeps that defied physics, and the massive cranes designed to lift tanks. From the fragile wooden blades of 1939 to the blast-proof nuclear guardians of today. This is the absolute physics-defying, definitive roster of the American rotary-wing fleet. Let's start with the ancestors and piston pioneers. Sikorsky VS-300 the Alpha. This is the genesis point. In 1939, Igor Sikorsky put on a fedora, strapped himself into a shaky metal frame, and lifted off. It was a tethered experiment that looked like a death trap, but it proved that the single main rotor with a tail rotor configuration was the only stable way to fly. Without this machine, modern aviation simply does not exist. Kellett KD-1, YG-1, the grandfather. Before the helicopter, there was the autogyro. Used by the Army in the 1930s, it had a rotor that spun freely in the wind like a pinwheel. Couldn't hover perfectly, but it gave the military its first taste of short takeoff capabilities and paved the way for rotary flight. Sikorsky R-4 Hoverfly the Genesis. Built in 1942, this was the world's first mass-produced helicopter. It looked like a steel cage wrapped in fabric and was incredibly underpowered. However, it proved that a machine could hover in combat, saving the first lives in history by extracting wounded soldiers from the dense jungles of Burma where planes couldn't land. Sikorsky R-5H-5, the Dragonfly. An upgrade to the R-4, this machine featured a distinct tandem cockpit and a larger fuselage. It was the first helicopter to show the real potential for utility work, famously used to rescue pilots stranded in flooded rivers and carrying stretchers on the outside of the hull. Sikorsky R-6 Hoverfly 2 the Middle Child. A refined, streamlined version of the R-4 with a glass cockpit and a more powerful engine. Hundreds were built for World War II, but they were quickly overshadowed by the workhorse R-5, leaving them as a forgotten bridge between the early experiments and the true utility birds. Firestone XR-9 the Rubber Chopper. Built by the Firestone Tire Company in 1946. It was a tiny, sleek tandem-seater affectionately called the rotacycle. It flew incredibly smoothly and had excellent controls, but the Army decided to stick with dedicated aviation companies, so Firestone went back to making tires. Kellett XR-8 the Egg Beater. The first American helicopter to successfully use intermeshing rotors. The blades crossed each other like scissors, eliminating the need for a tail rotor. It was unstable and weird, but it proved the concept that come on would later perfect. Kellett XR-10 the Behemoth. A massive twin-engine transport built in 1947. It looked like a flying bus with egg-beater rotors and was the largest helicopter of its time. However, during a test flight, two blades collided in mid-air, causing a catastrophic crash that ended the program immediately. Landgraf H-2 the Stealthwood. A very rare prototype from 1944. It had retractable landing gear, unheard of back then, and rotors made of wood. Instead of normal controls, it used ailerons on the rotor blades. It was quiet and sleek, but too complex for mass production. Cybele YH-24 Sky Hawk the Breadbox. Built by a small company in Kansas, this looked like a flying brick. The Army bought two of them to test the concept of a cheap, disposable utility helicopter. It was ugly, slow, and underpowered, proving that in aviation you get what you pay for. Next is the workhorses. Bell H-13 Sioux the Icon. The bubble canopy helicopter made famous by MASH Star. It was essentially a fishbowl attached to a tail boom. It became the symbol of the Korean War, saving thousands of lives by carrying wounded soldiers on external stretchers, exposed to the freezing wind and rotor wash. Bell H-13J Ranger, the presidential pioneer. Everyone thinks of the big Sea Kings, but Dwight D. Eisenhower was the first president to fly in a helicopter, and this was it. A modified Bell 47 with a comfortable enclosed cabin. It landed on the White House lawn in 1957, changing VIP transport forever. Hiller OH-23 Raven the Trainer. Often overshadowed by the Bell H-13, the Raven was actually the primary trainer for the Army in the 1950s. It featured a wider cabin and a unique paddle rotor system that gave it stability, training thousands of pilots who would later fight in Korea. Hayaseki H-21 Shawnee the Flying Banana. Named famed for its distinct bent fuselage which kept the rear rotors high above the ground. It was the first successful tandem-rotor cargo helicopter, capable of landing on snow, swamps, and mountains to deliver troops where no other vehicle could go. Sikorsky H-19 Chickasaw, the game changer, the first true transport helicopter. It placed the engine in the nose like a truck to leave the main cabin open for cargo. It revolutionized air assault tactics in Korea, proving you could land an entire squad behind enemy lines in seconds. Sikorsky H-34 Choctaw, the radial beast, the last and greatest of the piston-engined helicopters. It looked like a hunchback with a massive nose housing a loud radial engine. It was the primary troop transport for the Marines in the early days of Vietnam before the turbines took over. The H-37 Mojave, the Deuce, the Bulldog, a massive, ugly, twin-engine piston helicopter from the 1950s. It had two huge radial engines in pods on the side of the fuselage. It was the heavy lifter before turbines were invented, used primarily to recover crashed aircraft from the field. Sikorsky HR-2S1, the Marine Assault, the Marine Corps version of the Mojave. It featured unique clamshell doors in the nose, allowing it to drive a Jeep or a 105mm howitzer directly into the cargo bay. It was the first true heavy assault chopper. Next is the turbine revolution. Come on H-43 Husky, the firefighter. A strange-looking rescue helicopter with intermeshing rotors. It was used by the Air Force for crash rescue. It would hover over burning jets and use its powerful rotor wash to blow the flames away from the cockpit, allowing the pilot to escape the inferno. UH-1 Iroquois, the Huey, the legend, the single most iconic helicopter in history. The sound of its two-blade rotor chopping the air defined the Vietnam War. It was the cavalry horse of the 20th century, serving as a troop transport, gunship, and medevac all in one rugged package. UH-1N Twin Huey, the upgrade. The original Huey had one engine. If it quit, you crashed. The Marines and Air Force demanded two. The twin Huey has a distinct flat nose and two engines. It served as the bridge between the Vietnam Hueys and the modern era, guarding nuclear missile silos for decades. AH-1 Cobra, the Snake, the world's first dedicated attack helicopter. Born from the need to protect the Hueys, Bell took the Huey engine, slimmed the body down to just 38 inches wide, and added stub wings for rockets. It was fast, mean, and notoriously difficult to hit from the ground. OH-6 Cayuse, the Loach, the Egg, a tiny, teardrop-shaped scout helicopter. It was incredibly agile and fast, used to fly dangerously low to troll for enemy fire. When the enemy shot at the Loach, the waiting Cobras would swoop in and destroy them. OH-58 Kiowa, the Ranger, a militarized Bell Jet Ranger. It served alongside the Loach as a scout. In later years, it evolved into the Kiowa Warrior, armed with Hellfire missiles and a mast-mounted sight that allowed it to peek over trees while hiding the rest of the helicopter. AH-47 Chinook, the Bus, the twin-rotor heavy lifter that is still in service today. Its tandem rotor design puts all power to lift, allowing it to carry artillery pieces and vehicles. It is the backbone of Army logistics, famously fast and maneuverable for its massive size. AH-46C Knight, the Frog, the Marine Corps' version of a tandem rotor transport. Smaller than the Chinook, it was designed to fit on Navy ships. It served as the primary assault transport for Marines for decades, affectionately known as the Frog. CH-53C Stallion, the Giant, a massive heavy-lift helicopter built for the Marines. It has 6 blades and engines that roar like a jet. It was designed to lift heavy trucks and downed aircraft, serving as the heavy hauler of the fleet. AH-54 Tarhe, Sky Crane, the Skeleton, a helicopter with no cargo bay, just a spine and engines. It was designed to straddle heavy loads like tanks or shipping containers, lifting them up and flying them to the front. It looks like a giant insect and is the strongest lifter of its era. Next is modern warfare and special ops. UH-60 Black Hawk, the Standard, the definitive utility helicopter of the modern age. Designed to replace the Huey, it is faster, stronger, and more crashworthy. It serves every role imaginable, from medical evacuation to air assault to VIP transport. AH-64 Apache, the Tank Killer, the most advanced attack helicopter in history. It carries a 30mm chain gun linked to the pilot's helmet. Where he looks, the gun points. Built to stop a Soviet tank invasion, it is now the premier hunter-killer of the battlefield. MH-6 Little Bird, the Killer Egg. Used by the elite 160th SOAR Night Stalkers. Small enough to land on a street corner or a roof. Special operators ride on planks on the outside, ready to jump off and fight instantly. MH-60L DAP, the Gunship Hawk. A Black Hawk that thinks it's an Apache. Used by special forces, it carries no troops. Instead, it is loaded with 30mm cannons, rockets, and Hellfire missiles to provide heavy fire support for special ops raids. MH-53 Pave Low, the Transformer. The most technologically advanced helicopter of the Cold War. Packed with terrain-following radar and massive armor, it was designed to fly special forces deep behind enemy lines in pitch-black darkness and bad weather where no other pilot would dare to fly. Stealth Black Hawk, Silent Hawk, the Secret. A highly classified, modified Black Hawk used in the raid to kill Osama bin Laden. It features sharp angles, special coatings, and noise-dampening technology to slip past air defense radars. It has never been officially revealed to the public. UH-72 Lakota, the Guardsman. The Army's primary light utility helicopter for domestic operations. If you see a military helicopter responding to a hurricane or patrolling the US-Mexico border, it's likely a Lakota. It has no heavy guns, designed purely for logistics and surveillance. MH-139 Grey Wolf, the Guardian. The Air Force's new helicopter that patrols the vast nuclear missile fields of Montana and North Dakota. It is fast, quiet, and designed to deploy security teams to a missile silo in minutes. Bell 412, Sentinel, the Border Guard, a modern, four-blade version of the Huey. While mostly civilian, the U.S. military uses a few of these for partner nation support and special security details in South America. It's the Huey that went to private school. Bell 429 Global Ranger, the Nuke Response. Used by the Department of Energy and NNSA. These specialized, dark-painted helicopters are on standby to transport nuclear incident response teams to any location in the U.S. at a moment's notice. Next is Naval, Coast Guard, and amphibians. AH-64 Apache Guard, the Flying Boat. Before the modern rescue birds, there was the Sea Guard. It looked like a hunchback whale and was the first turbine-powered amphibious helicopter. It saved over 15,000 lives, capable of landing in high waves to pluck sailors directly from the water. SH-3 Sea King, the amphibian, the famous boat-hulled helicopter used to recover Apollo astronauts from the ocean. While famous for space recovery, its main job was hunting Soviet submarines using dipping sonar and torpedoes. HH-3 Jolly Green Giant, the Savior, a modified Sea King used by the Air Force for deep combat search and rescue in Vietnam. Heavily armored and armed, it flew deep into enemy territory to pick up downed pilots, protected by its green camouflage paint. SH-2 Sea Sprite, the Frigate Bird, a compact naval helicopter designed to fit on the small decks of destroyers and frigates. It was packed with sensors and torpedoes, acting as the long eyes of the ship to hunt submarines over the horizon. HH-65 Dolphin, the Icon, a distinct orange helicopter with a fenestrine tail rotor, a fan inside the tail. It is the primary short-range rescue helicopter of the U.S. Coast Guard, famous for plucking sailors out of hurricanes and rough seas. MH-68 Stingray, the Sniper, a specialized agile helicopter used by the Coast Guard's Hytron unit. It carries a sniper who shoots out the engines of drug-smuggling speedboats in the Caribbean, stopping cartels in their tracks. HH-60 Jayhawk, the Storm Rider, the Coast Guard's long-range rescue helicopter, based on the Black Hawk. It carries massive fuel tanks to fly hundreds of miles offshore to save sinking ships in the worst weather imaginable. MH-53 Sea Dragon, the Minesweeper, heavier and stronger than the Sea Stallion. Its job isn't to carry troops. It drags a massive sled through the ocean to detonate naval mines. It is the largest and heaviest helicopter currently in the Western world. S-61R HH-3F Pelican, the Giant Boat, the Coast Guard's heavy amphibian before the Jayhawk arrived. It featured a rear ramp for easy loading and a watertight hull, serving as the heavy lifter of the seas for 40 years. Next is the Weird Science and X-Planes. Hughes XH-17 the Monster. Built by Howard Hughes in the 1950s, this was a behemoth with the largest rotor system ever flown, spanning 100 130 feet. It was so big it didn't use a normal engine. Instead, it pumped compressed air to jet engines mounted on the tips of the blades. It was incredibly loud and inefficient, but it proved the heavy lift crane concept was possible. Boeing AH-64 the Goliath. This sits in a museum as a rusted frame, but it was almost the largest U.S. helicopter ever. Designed in the 70s as a heavy-lift helicopter, HLH, it featured 3 massive engines and was designed to lift twice what a Chinook could carry. It was canceled just months before its first flight, leaving it as a giant what-if of aviation. Piasecki YH-16 transporter the Titanic. A massive tandem-rotor helicopter built in the 1950s that looked like a flying ocean liner. It was 77 feet long and intended to carry 40 troops. During a test flight, the rear rotor shaft failed, causing the helicopter to break apart in midair. The crash killed the crew and ended the dream of piston-powered supertransports. Hiller YH-32 Hornet the flamethrower, one of the strangest helicopters ever built. It had no engine inside the body. Instead, it had 2 ramjet engines mounted on the tips of the rotor blades. When it flew, the rotor spun with a brilliant ring of fire visible for miles at night. It was light and simple but burned fuel so fast it could only fly for 20 minutes. McDonnell XH-20 Little Henry, the park bench. This looked like a simple steel tube frame with a seat and a rotor. Like the Hornet, it was powered by ramjets on the blade tips. It was loud, spit fire, and weighed almost nothing. It was the Air Force's attempt to build a flying motorcycle, but the noise and fuel consumption made it impractical. XH-26 Jet Jeep the Collapsible. A tiny, one-man helicopter fueled by pulse jets. The genius of this design was that it could be folded up, put inside a shipping container, and dropped by parachute to down pilots. It could be assembled in 20 minutes and flown away using gasoline, kerosene, or even whiskey in an emergency. Piasecki VZ-8 Air Jeep the Flying Car. The Army literally wanted a Jeep that could fly. Piasecki built a flat platform with 2 horizontal duct fans inside. Soldiers could drive it along the ground or fly over rivers and minefields. It worked surprisingly well, but the Army decided that helicopters were more efficient than flying cars. The Lackner HZ-1 Aerocycle the Meat Grinder, the most dangerous aircraft ever tested. It was a small platform with a lawnmower engine and rotors underneath the pilot's feet. The soldier stood on it and leaned to steer. The Army quickly realized that if a soldier slipped, he would fall directly into the spinning blades. Hiller VZ-1 Pawnee the Flying Trash Can. A duct fan platform where the pilot stood inside a round duct. It relied on kinesthetic control, meaning the pilot steered by leaning his body weight. It actually worked, but it was slow, loud, and made the pilot a perfect exposed target for snipers. Avro Canada VZ-9 Avrocar the UFO. A literal flying saucer built by the Army and Air Force. It used a central turborotor to create a cushion of air. It was supposed to be a supersonic fighter that could take off from anywhere. In reality, it was unstable and wobbled uncontrollably just 3 feet off the ground, becoming a famous failure. Sikorsky Cypher the Donut. A surveillance drone from the 1990s that looked like a tire floating in the air. It had a shrouded rotor inside a circular hull, which allowed it to bounce off walls or fly down narrow city streets without crashing. It was a pioneer in urban drone warfare. Boeing X-50 Dragonfly the Stopwatch, a DARPA project that defied physics. It took off using a rotor like a helicopter. Once in the air, the rotor would stop spinning and lock into place to become a fixed wing, allowing the aircraft to fly like a jet. It proved that a stopped rotor flight was possible. LTV XC-142 the Tilt Wing. Before the Osprey, the military tried to tilt the entire wing of a cargo plane vertical to hover. The XC-142 was a massive 4-engine transport that actually flew and carried troops. However, the mechanical complexity of tilting a massive wing made it a maintenance nightmare, and the project was scrapped. Next is speed, tilt rotors, and the future. V-22 Osprey the Transformer. A tilt rotor that takes off like a helicopter and flies like a plane. It combines the speed of a turboprop with the landing capability of a helicopter. Despite a troubled development history, it revolutionized marine assault ranges, allowing troops to land hundreds of miles further than before. AH-64 Cheyenne the Failed Dream. A revolutionary attack helicopter from the 1960s with a pusher propeller on the tail for high speed. It was designed to fly 240 miles per hour and outrun tanks. It was incredibly advanced but too complex and dangerous, leading to its cancellation in favor of the Apache. Sikorsky S-69 XH-59, the coaxial jet, a futuristic prototype with two rotors spinning in opposite directions, coaxial, and two jet engines strapped to the sides. It eliminated the need for a tail rotor and proved that coaxial rotors were the key to high-speed flight, laying the groundwork for modern supercopters. Sikorsky S-72 RSRA X-Wing, the hybrid, a helicopter fitted with massive fixed wings and jet engines, could lock its rotor in place to act as a wing, allowing it to fly like a jet. It was used by NASA and the Army to test how rotor blades behave at high speeds, providing crucial data for future designs. Bell 15-3, the grandfather, the very first tilt rotor. It looked like a shaky science experiment in the 1950s, with engines mounted on the tips of long wings. It vibrated violently, but it proved that you could tilt rotors from vertical to horizontal without falling out of the sky. Bell 15-15, the father, the success story that led directly to the V-22 Osprey. Small, agile, and reliable, the 15-15 dazzled crowds at airshows by transforming from helicopter to plane mode in seconds. It proved that tilt rotors could be safe and practical for military use. Sikorsky X-2, the record breaker, a small, sleek coaxial helicopter with a pusher prop. In 2010, it shattered speed records, flying at 290 miles per hour. It proved that the advancing blade concept worked, signaling the end of the traditional slow helicopter era. V-280 Valor, the successor, the sleek tilt rotor chosen to replace the Black Hawk. Unlike the Osprey, only the rotor gearboxes tilt, not the engines. It promises to double the speed and range of the Army's air assault fleet in the coming decades. SB-1 Defiant, the contender, a massive coaxial helicopter with a pusher propeller. Though it lost the competition to the V-280, it demonstrated the incredible stability and speed of the rigid rotor design, able to hover in conditions that would ground lesser aircraft. FARA prototypes, Raider X and Invictus, the Lost Scouts. The Sikorsky Raider X and Bell 360 Invictus were high-speed scouts designed to replace the Kiowa. They were fast, stealthy, and lethal. The program was canceled in 2024 due to budget shifts, but their technology will define the next generation of rotary flight. Next is the rejects and foreign ghosts. Bell AH-64, the Apache rival, the attack helicopter that lost to the Apache. It looked similar but had tricycle landing gear and the pilot sat in the front. It crashed during testing and lacked the crash survivability of the Apache, sending it to the scrapyard of history. Boeing Vertol UH-61, the Black Hawk rival, the sleek runner-up to the Black Hawk. It was faster and used composite rotors, but it was slightly smaller inside. That lack of cabin space cost it the contract, and only a few prototypes were ever built. Sikorsky S-67 Black Hawk, the gunship speedster, not to be confused with the UH-60. This was a sleek, winged attack helicopter built in the 1970s. It was fast, agile, and could perform loops. It was designed as an attack helicopter that could also carry troops, but a fatal crash at the Farnborough Air Show ended the program. VH-71 Kestrel, the billion-dollar mistake. The US wanted a new Marine One and chosen this European design. The cost ballooned to $3.2 billion for just 9 helicopters due to constantly changing requirements for missile defense and hardening. The program was canceled, and the brand new aircraft were sold to Canada for spare parts. Mi-24 Hind and Mi-17 Hip, the Red Air. Soviet helicopters operated secretly by US forces. Acquired from defectors or captured in the Middle East, they are flown by mysterious test squadrons in the Nevada desert to train US pilots on how to fight against Russian technology. Flettner FL-282 Colibri, the Nazi prize. Captured from Germany in 1945, this intermeshing rotor helicopter taught American engineers how to build stable helicopters. It was far more advanced than anything the Allies had, and its DNA lives on in the come-on helicopters of today. Fokker Achilles FA-330, the Kite, a German rotor kite towed behind U-boats. The US captured these and tested them to see if they could be used to tow spies behind ships. It proved that unpowered rotors could generate significant lift. Benson X-25, the ejection seat, a displaced, discharged vehicle. The idea was for a pilot to eject, unfold a tiny autogyro strapped to his back, start a small engine, and fly himself home. The Air Force tested it but realized it was insane to expect a pilot to assemble a helicopter while falling through the air. Gyrodyne XRON-1 The Scooter, a one-man coaxial helicopter dropped to Marines. It flew perfectly and was easy to control, but the Marines realized that a radio was cheaper than giving every soldier a personal helicopter, so the project was abandoned. PD-100 Black Hornet The Nano, used by U.S. Marines today. It is a tiny helicopter, smaller than a human hand, that looks like a toy. It flies silently into buildings or over hills to send live video back to the soldier, revolutionizing surveillance on the microscale. Next is the trainers and odd variants. AH-65 Osage The Mosquito, a tiny, lightweight piston trainer. If you learned to fly in the Vietnam era, you likely started in this shaky, buzzing machine. It was notoriously unforgiving, earning a reputation that if you could hover an Osage, you could fly anything. AH-67 Creek The Classroom, the military version of the Bell Jet Ranger. Painted orange and white, it was the school bus of Army aviation for 25 years. It taught autorotations to thousands of modern pilots before they graduated to the Black Hawks and Apaches. AH-57C Ranger The Naval Teacher, the Navy's version of the Jet Ranger. It taught generations of Navy, Marine, and Coast Guard pilots how to navigate over the open ocean and the terrifying art of landing on a moving ship deck in high seas. AH-73 Thrasher The New School, an Italian-designed Leonardo helicopter recently adopted as the Navy's new trainer. It features modern glass cockpits and digital displays, preparing students for the high-tech systems of the F-35 and future vertical lift aircraft. MH-90 Enforcer The Cartel Hunter, a specialized MD-500 Defender used by the Coast Guard in the 90s. These were the pioneers of the Hytron unit, the first helicopters authorized to use precision rifle fire to shoot out the engines of drug smuggling boats in the Caribbean. Sikorsky S-59 XH-39, the Racer. In 1954, this sleek helicopter set the world speed record. It was beautiful, with retractable landing gear and a streamlined fuselage, but it was deemed too fancy and expensive for the Army, which preferred the rugged, simple Bell Sioux. Hiller 1099 The Box, a contender against the Huey. It was a square, boxy utility helicopter that could actually lift more than the early Huey. However, the Army preferred the Huey's aerodynamic design and sliding doors, so the 1099 was relegated to the history books. Lockheed CL-475 The Funny Face, a goofy-looking helicopter with a rigid rotor built in secret by Lockheed using spare parts and a fabric skin. Despite its looks, it proved the rigid rotor concept that would later make high-speed helicopters like the Cheyenne possible. Bell D-292 The Plastic Chopper. It looked like a regular helicopter, but it was built entirely out of composite materials, plastic and carbon fiber, instead of aluminum. It was crashed on purpose to prove that plastic airframes absorb impact better than metal, making future helicopters safer. Hughes XH-28 The Giant Ghost, a blueprint for a massive flying crane powered by jet tips, intended to lift 50 tons. The project was cancelled because it was deemed too loud and fuel-hungry, but the mock-ups remain the largest helicopter designs ever drafted by the U.S. military. VH-92 Patriot The New Ride, the modern replacement for the Marine One fleet. Based on the proven S-92, it offers more space, speed, and advanced anti-missile protection systems to keep the commander-in-chief safe in the volatile 21st century.